Hey, today we are in beautiful Scotland. Everyone knows the country for its rugged hills, deep valleys, lochs, and sea monsters in one of the most dramatic landscapes on the continent. And Scotland's capital city sits directly next to one of those cliffs. Edinburgh isn't exactly built on gentle terrain. The city center stretches across a series of volcanic ridges and valleys, with a castle placed right on top of the steepest rock of them all. When you zoom in, you immediately notice how irregular everything looks, especially compared to Glasgow, for example. Narrow streets, sudden drops to lower levels, staircases connecting entire parts of the city, and a huge amount of old, dark stone buildings that give the whole place a very distinct mood. It makes you wonder why and how people started building here in the first place. It must have begun with the castle, right? Then there's the strange divide. On one side, you have a medieval street pattern, and as soon as you cross the railway tracks, it suddenly becomes a clean planned grid. Two city centers side by side, with completely different layouts. And the railway itself is another story. Instead of going around the hills, it cuts straight through them in a deep trench, right between the old and new towns, before continuing north to that huge red cantilever bridge you've probably seen at least once. That thing is the definition of Victorian over-engineering. All of this raises the question, how did Edinburgh end up looking like this? In this video, we'll take a closer look at the geography around the castle, how the old and new towns developed in such different ways, why the railway was built directly through the middle, and what life looks like today in this very old and cold capital city. Let's explore Edinburgh. To understand Edinburgh, you have to start with the ground it's built on. The entire city center sits on the remains of ancient volcanic activity that shaped the landscape millions of years ago. This geology isn't a side detail. It's the reason the city looks the way it does. The most important feature is Castle Rock, a volcanic plug with extremely steep cliffs on three sides. It rises sharply above the surrounding area and creates a natural defensive position. That's why the first major settlement formed right here. People were living in the region long before, but this strategic high point became the center of power. By the early Middle Ages, a fort stood on the summit. This later developed into Edinburgh Castle, which still dominates the skyline, and explains why the city grew outward from this single point. The castle wasn't placed here because the terrain was convenient. It was placed here because it was difficult, hard to reach, easy to defend, and perfect for a royal stronghold. From the castle, a long ridge extends eastward. This ridge became the Royal Mile, the spine of the old town, and this is where Edinburgh takes on its unusual shape. To the north and south of this ridge lie two deep valleys carved by glaciers. These valleys limited expansion and forced the early settlement into a narrow, elongated strip. There simply wasn't flat land to build wide streets or squares, so the town grew vertically and densely. It wasn't just the ridge that shaped the city. The wider terrain around it is just as striking. To the east rises Arthur's Seat, the remains of a much older volcano. A crag simply means a steep, rocky cliff, not to be mistaken with anything else. Anyway, both sit inside Holyrood Park, a huge protected green space right next to the city center. And honestly, that has to be one of the most impressive pieces of urban parkland in Europe. This rugged terrain forms a natural barrier around the old core and adds to the dramatic topography that defines Edinburgh. When you look at Edinburgh from above, one of the first things you notice is that the city center is completely divided. One side looks like the road map was drawn by a 3-year-old, and the other is a nicely arranged grid. Yeah, that's because we have an old and a new town. Narrow alleys, irregular building lines, and streets that follow the terrain instead of any plan. This part of Edinburgh developed when the city was confined to the ridge between the two valleys. Limited space, steep slopes, and defensive needs shaped everything. That's why you get stacked streets like the Cowgate sitting below the South Bridge. And why so many buildings appear to have multiple ground floors depending on which side you enter from. Just a few hundred meters to the north, everything changes. Cross the valley, or today the railway trench, and the city suddenly becomes planned. This is the new town, designed in the late 1700s as a response to overcrowding. Instead of squeezing more people onto the ridge, Edinburgh decided to build an entirely new district on flatter land to the north. The result was a clear, rational Enlightenment-era grid with wide streets, formal squares, and elegant Georgian terraces. Both sides together form the historic core of Edinburgh, and both are designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This contrast sets the stage for the next layer of Edinburgh's layout. The railway, which arrived much later but runs right between these two worlds. Realistically, there were two options: go around the hills, which would have placed the main station far from both city centers, or cut straight through the valley between them. Engineers chose the second option, and honestly, this is an absolutely cool and efficient design in my opinion. It's like the central station is the connecting link between these two districts. Instead of climbing over the terrain, the tracks stay low on the valley floor, with streets, bridges, and walkways built over them. This is where Waverley Station sits. It's the busiest railway station in Scotland, and one of the largest below-street level stations in the UK. You know what would be epic? To even cover the station and build a massive park above it like in Stuttgart. Anyway, north of the station, the trains leave the city center and head toward the coast. Instead of curving inland to avoid the hills, the line continues straight toward the Firth of Forth. That was probably the hardest geographic location to pronounce in my entire YouTube career, to be honest. But yeah, this leads to one of the most iconic pieces of railway engineering in the world, the Forth Bridge. Completed in 1890, the bridge is a massive red cantilever structure carrying the East Coast Main Line across the Firth. It was one of the first major steel bridges on Earth, and at the time of opening, it had the longest cantilever spans ever built. Even today, it remains one of the most recognizable infrastructure landmarks in Britain. It also plays a practical role. This route connects Edinburgh with Fife, the North Coast, and the Highlands. Without it, rail travel north of the city would be far slower and far less direct. One of the first things you notice when living in Edinburgh is the architecture. Most of the city is built from the same dark sandstone that was quarried locally, which gives the streets a very consistent and sometimes slightly gloomy appearance. Especially in the older districts, that material wasn't chosen for style. It was simply practical, durable. But behind that historic facade, everyday life is actually very modern. Edinburgh is a compact and walkable city, and a lot of daily movement happens on foot or by bus and tram. You climb more hills, more staircases, and more steep streets than in most cities its size. Distances are short, but they are rarely flat. The climate shapes the rhythm of living here as well. Temperatures stay cool for much of the year. Winters are long, and the coast brings wind and sudden weather changes. The older stone buildings hold heat quite well, but can feel cold and heavy in winter, adding to the city's distinctive atmosphere. The universities bring tens of thousands of students, and there's a strong mix of international residents, researchers, artists, and people working in tech, healthcare, and finance. In certain areas, especially around the university and city center, the streets feel energetic despite the historic setting. So modern life in Edinburgh is a mix of practical routines shaped by the terrain and climate, combined with a lively population living inside a very old-looking city. It feels historic, but it functions like a modern European urban center with a unique atmosphere you don't really find anywhere else. So that's Edinburgh, a city shaped by volcanic terrain, divided by history, layered with medieval and Georgian planning, cut through by a railway, and surrounded by some of the most dramatic urban landscapes in Europe. It looks old, it feels a bit cold, but it lives like a modern capital with its own rhythm and atmosphere. If you enjoyed exploring Edinburgh with me, leave a like, comment where I should fly next, and subscribe for more city deep dives. And if you want to support the channel, you can join my Patreon. It really helps a lot. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.